Brothers and sisters, the gospel today speaks to us through a parable the reason why it is so difficult to forgive. It is so difficult to forgive because it comes from the heart of the Master, meaning the one who can really totally forgive is the Lord. And for us, we find it too difficult, as in the parable. Even if we experience forgiveness from the Lord, still it's so difficult for us to forgive our fellow. Even if we owe much bigger to the Lord, to the one who owes us smaller, in smaller terms, smaller matters, we become angry, we become indignant. That is human nature, because human nature is not divine nature. But then, it is not impossible. The point of the gospel, the point of the parable is that it is also within human nature, if only we can imitate the Lord. If only we can recall, and if only we can remember that in our deepest selves, we have that power because the Lord has enabled us to do so. Perhaps then the reason why we are not, or it's so difficult to forgive, is that not because we don't have it in ourselves, but because we don't go back to ourselves. We forget that we are good, that God created us to be good. Why? Because we are always outside ourselves. Outside. In the world. Using the parameters or the conditions or the criteria of the world. Outside. So what is the solution? Go back. The word retreat allows us to go back. The word recollection. That is why we have the exercise retreat and recollection. Allows us to recall, to remember, to go back to oneself. One Spanish woman writer who wrote a novel entitled Teresa. In that novel, and I'm translating, she says, our hearts and our being retreat into sweet solitude. Our hearts and our being retreat into sweet solitude. Beautiful to hear, but sometimes we're really afraid of solitude. We don't like to be alone. We don't like that there's nothing to do except to be by ourselves. We want to do so many things. And so we're so noisy, just like the world. Because we fear that when we are alone, or we fear solitude because we equate solitude with loneliness. When one is alone, when you are alone, you must be lonely. So we don't like solitude. But when we are communing with nature, for example, isn't that solitude? Aren't we alone? Don't we experience silence? And then we experience peace. Why is that? Because there is beatitude in solitude. And when we put these solitudes together, when we carry that solitude in ourselves, then that becomes solicitude. I'm only able to relate to you because of the wisdom that you bring. But if you're all noise, there is no wisdom. We listen to wisdom as much as we listen to ourselves. What am I saying? I'm saying that perhaps the reason for the incapacity to forgive lies in the fact that we have not listened to ourselves in the first place. We have not gone deep into ourselves. That's why we forget. We forget that we are good. We forget that we have been forgiven. We forget that deep inside ourselves, deep inside our hearts, is God talking to us in silence. We call that conscience. That is why in the modern world, there is no conscience. So we have problems in the modern world, and all these problems lie in the fact that the modern world has forgotten conscience. The question, how many times should I forgive, is modern. You see, Peter, in this instance, is modern. We count 7 times only, okay? 1, 2. And when you reach 7, I'm angry. That is why we cannot forgive. We ask the question, how many times? Our criterion for looking at people or for relating to people would be, how many times? Or how much? When that becomes the criterion, we forget. Brothers and sisters, as Rosa Chastel, the writer, would tell us, retreat, recollect, remember, recall that our hearts are being retreat into sweet solitude, not alone and lonely. For solitude is the beatitude of solicitude. When we experience this, then you become wise. You have wisdom. And when you are wise, you won't ask, how many times should I forgive my brother, my sister? Like Jesus, you know the answer. Not once, not thrice, not 7 times, but infinitely. 70 times 7 is infinity. Forget counting. Because the love of God, the forgiveness of God, to me, to you, is uncountable. It is infinite.